Hey everyone, I've mentioned in several of my other videos, and I talk about it all the time on Discord, about how the Dresden Files is one of my favorite series I've ever read. But it's pretty common when you talk to fans of the Dresden Files that you'll hear things like, don't judge it based on the first few books, or it gets good after the first 3, or just wait until book 7, or even better yet, you'll love it when it gets to book 12. Not to mention all the warnings they'll give you about Dresden commenting on how every woman looks. Basically, anytime you talk to a big fan of the series, they're more likely to point out all the flaws rather than tell you what they really love about the series. So I decided it was time to make a video on why you should read the Dresden Files. For those of you who know nothing about the Dresden Files, this is an urban fantasy series that takes place in Chicago and is told from the first-person point of view of Harry Dresden. Whereas most of the supernatural world stays hidden from public sight, Harry Dresden takes the unorthodox approach of openly advertising as a wizard for hire, as a private investigator and consultant. The world that Jim Butcher created is one where every fairy tale, every religion, basically every belief is real, and they all coexist within our world. Witches and wizards, real. Vampires, real. Werewolves, ghosts, zombies, fairies, angels, demons, dragons, Excalibur, Bigfoot, Greek gods, Norse gods, Santa Claus, unicorns. They're all real, and the list just keeps going on and on. One of the incredible things that Butcher is able to do, besides having all these creatures coexist in a single world, is he explains each and every one of them. They all have strengths and weaknesses and reasons for being the way that they are, and he's going to teach the reader all of that. And he manages to do this in a way that does not come across as being an info dump at all. He also makes it seem realistic that these creatures really do exist and are in our world with us. He basically turns fairy tales and beliefs into a science, and he manages to do this with a sense of humor. That was one thing that really surprised me when I started reading the series. I thought this was going to be a really dark series, but it's actually very lighthearted most of the time. Currently, there are 17 primary books, along with 2 collections of short stories, and I believe the plan is for the main novels to total 25 books when all is said and done. So it's not a completed series yet, but there is certainly plenty to keep you busy for a long time. However, none of these books are actually all that long. They're pretty quick reads, so it's not nearly as intimidating to start this series as it would normally sound when someone says, hey, read this epic fantasy, it's going to be 25 books long. These are a lot easier to get through than most fantasy novels I've read. As I mentioned, all sorts of creatures and beings live in this world. And I don't care if he would have written a book the size of a Stormlight Archive novel, that still wouldn't have been enough for him to do all the world building that's required for the Dresden Files. So what Butcher did is he broke it up into smaller pieces. Each book tells its own little story while building onto the bigger plot line. This type of writing often feels very episodic, especially early on in the series. I like to think of each book as almost like a college course. So Stormfront is Dresden 101, then Full Moon, Dresden 110, and Grave Peril is Dresden 160. And then after that, you move upgrade into the 200 level classes until about book 8, and then books 9 through 15 are 300 level classes, and then 16 and on are your capstone courses. When I first read the series, I thought the first few books were basically the same story told over and over again, but substituting out a few characters. However, on rereads, I've been able to see the foreshadowing of what's to come as early as Stormfront and Full Moon. The way he builds this series, it just keeps on growing. The cast of characters get larger, the plot lines get more intricate, the stakes are higher, the consequences get bigger, and eventually you finish a book and you look back and realize you've been reading an epic fantasy in disguise the whole time. It's very common to get through the first few books and think, nah, that was alright, but I don't see what all the fuss is about. And for that reason, many people end up using these as palate cleansers between other epic fantasies. They pick one book up, and then a couple months later, or a month later, a few weeks later, they'll read the next one, and then they'll go another month or two and then pick up the next one, and they just keep doing that. That's the approach I took for the first 7 books, and it's an approach that I highly recommend. The books are written in a way where it's really easy to pick up the next book, even if it's been a long time since you read the one prior. And this approach helps keep the early books from feeling too repetitive, and it gives you a break from being in Dresden's head for too long. For as much as I love this series, I can admit it can get tiring hearing all of Dresden's thoughts. Let's just say no one's going to be confusing him as a Captain America type character anytime soon. Maybe you could compare him to a broke, much less intelligent Tony Stark, but I'm getting off track. The point is, Dresden has his faults. Butcher has said that he wanted to write a series with a wizard as his main protagonist. However, if you look at many epic fantasies and classic fantasy stories, wizards are these powerful beings that often you don't see much of them. They just come in and out of the storyline, but they're always able to solve the problem, ultimately. But having a protagonist that can just outsmart and outpower all of his enemies all the time, that wouldn't make for a great story. So he solved that problem by creating Harry Dresden, a young, pretty unexperienced wizard who doesn't have great control of his power and has plenty of character flaws. The most glaring of these flaws you'll see throughout the series is Dresden feeling like he has to protect everyone. This could mean that he keeps secrets from his friends, or he doesn't bring backup to a dangerous situation, or he just runs into a dangerous situation without a plan, or he goes off and tries to save someone who doesn't deserve it just because it's the right thing to do. He does these things with the best intentions in mind, but they often blow up in his face. He kind of reminds me of that person who wants to help you out, but then ends up doing everything wrong and making your job harder in the long run. You appreciate the thought and the intentions, but you could have done without the results. And just like that person, Dresden can really get on your nerves, but you know he's trying and truly wants to do what's best for everyone. And ultimately, he does come through in the end. And the difference between him and that person I just described is the reason he's involved is he's the only one who can do what he's doing. You sometimes wish there was someone better, but he's the hero you got. So with all that said, why do I think people should prioritize reading the Dresden Files when there are so many great books out there? First, they're easy reads. The early books are really short and you don't have 1,000 different names of places and characters that you have to remember and keep track of. Yes, it builds into an epic fantasy, but each step is small enough that you never get overwhelmed. Second, the world feels real. If you want to be fully immersed in a fantasy world, this series will get you there if you give it time. Especially for someone like me. I'm from Chicago, so all the facts and places he mentions really brings me into the story with him. Third, the series has plenty of comedy. I'm not gonna say it has hilarious banter like in Rhaenyra or the Grey Coats, but there are plenty of jokes and humor, and when all is said and done, this is one of the most fun series I've had the pleasure of reading. Reason number 4, there's a detective and mystery feel to each of these books. There's always another secret and the clock is ticking. That element keeps the pace driving forward like a beating drum. And last, but certainly not least, the character work is fantastic. You have good guys that have character flaws, like an Iron Man. You have bad guys that are willing to team up with their own enemies if it's going to benefit both parties, like a Loki. You have good guys that never do any wrong, like a Captain America. You have characters that are learning how to be a hero, like a Spider-Man. Bad guys that are evil to their core. Characters who you can't tell where their allegiance falls. Characters that care about nothing but revenge. And characters that care about nothing but protecting those that they love. And even a character that threatens the existence of all the other characters I've mentioned, like a Thanos. So whatever type of character you like, you'll find in this series. Not to mention, if there's a Hall of Fame for animal companions and fantasy series, Mouse would certainly be a first ballot Hall of Famer. So for all those reasons and more, I think you should read the Dresden Files. And if you do, stay tuned. I'm planning on putting out reviews for each of the books in the series over the next few months. So until next time, bye.